What's happening to the king's body right now?
The ulcers, they're eating him alive. Pus and rotting flesh falling from his legs. We draw straws to dress him.
How did the jousting accident change the king?
2 hours unconscious. Brain injury turned him into a paranoid monster. The charming prince died that day.
He made her watch her brother die first. 5 men executed for imaginary affairs. Psychological cruelty before the beheading.
What happened to the king's body during the funeral?
The coffin exploded. Gases burst the lead lining. Royal remains everywhere. Dogs licked up the divine king.
But that's just the surface of Henry VIII's grotesque transformation from Renaissance prince to rotting tyrant. You think you know the story of England's most infamous king? Think again. What you're about to discover makes Game of Thrones look like a children's fairy tale. This is the true story of how absolute power didn't just corrupt absolutely, it literally rotted a man alive from the inside out. Let's dive deeper into the Tudor palaces, where a once athletic king became a prisoner of his own decomposing body. Picture this. Henry VIII started life as every inch the Renaissance prince. Tall, handsome, athletic, intelligent, the golden boy of European royalty. By his death in 1547, he'd become something out of a medieval horror story. Everything changed on January 24th, 1536. During a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace, Henry's horse fell on top of him. The impact was so severe that witnesses thought the king was dead. For 2 terrifying hours, the future of England hung in balance as Henry lay unconscious. In medieval terms, 2 hours unconscious meant you were practically dead. But Henry survived. Or did he? Modern medical experts believe this wasn't just a bump on the head. This was massive traumatic brain injury that literally rewired Henry's personality. The charming, relatively reasonable young king died that day on the tournament field. What crawled out of that wreckage was something else entirely. Think about it. Before 1536, Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon for over 20 years without executing a single wife. After the accident, 2 dead wives in 11 years, plus systematic psychological torture that would make modern serial killers jealous. The brain injury explains everything. The explosive rages, the paranoid delusions, the dramatic personality swings that terrorized his court. But the jousting accident wasn't Henry's only medical disaster. Modern doctors now believe he also developed Cushing syndrome, a hormonal disorder that would explain his catastrophic weight gain, uncontrollable mood swings, and those horrific leg ulcers that turned him into a walking corpse. Let's talk numbers that will blow your mind. Henry's waist measured 54 inches. For perspective, that's bigger than most people are tall. He weighed around 400 pounds in an era when the average man weighed maybe 140. But here's the truly horrifying part. It wasn't just obesity. His legs were covered in festering open wounds that never healed. We're talking about massive ulcers that oozed pus and rotted flesh continuously. These weren't small cuts, they were gaping holes in his body that grew larger and more infected with each passing year. The smell was so overwhelming that courtiers would hold perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces when approaching the king. Historical accounts describe the stench as being detectable from several rooms away. Servants actually drew straws to determine who had to help dress him because getting close to those wounds was considered a form of punishment. Picture this medieval horror show. The most powerful man in England couldn't control his own bowel movements. Royal attendants had to carry special portable chairs everywhere he went because Henry could barely make it from room to room without having an accident. This is the same guy who claimed divine right to rule and executed people for looking at him the wrong way. But the physical decay was nothing compared to what Henry did to his wives. Everyone knows he had 6 wives and executed 2 of them, but the reality of what those women endured goes far beyond a simple beheading. We're talking about psychological torture that would make modern psychologists weep. Take Anne Boleyn. Before her execution, Henry didn't just decide to kill her. He orchestrated an elaborate frame-up that included forcing her own court musician to confess under torture to having an affair with her. But here's the truly sick part. Henry made Anne watch as 5 men, including her own brother, were executed for allegedly sleeping with her. Imagine the psychological horror. She had to stand there knowing she was next, watching innocent people die because of her husband's paranoid fantasies. This wasn't just execution. This was calculated mental torture designed to break her spirit before the axe fell. Catherine Howard got it even worse. She was basically a teenager when Henry married her, and when he discovered her past relationships, not even affairs during their marriage, just teenage relationships from before they met, he didn't just execute her. He passed a law making it treason for anyone to marry the king without revealing their complete sexual history. Think about that level of petty vindictiveness. The man was so personally offended that his teenage wife wasn't a virgin, that he changed the entire legal system of England. He created new crimes just to justify murdering a girl for having a past. But the psychological games were the worst part. Henry would shower his wives with gifts and affection one day, then completely ignore them or threaten them the next. Catherine of Aragon spent her final years essentially under house arrest, forbidden from seeing her daughter Mary, while Henry spread rumors that she was mentally ill. She died alone, possibly poisoned, writing letters to Henry begging to see their child. Letters he never bothered to read. Here's something that will blow your mind. Henry actually forced his wives to sign documents agreeing to their own divorces or annulments. Anne of Cleves was so terrified of him that she agreed to a fake marriage annulment just to avoid execution. She basically had to pretend their marriage never happened and thank him for the privilege of not being murdered. Speaking of horror shows, let's talk about Henry's eating habits. If you think competitive eating is crazy today, wait until you hear about Henry VIII's daily food consumption. This man didn't just eat like a king, he ate like he was trying to single-handedly cause a famine. Henry consumed roughly 5,000 calories per day. For context, that's more than double what an active adult male should eat. And remember, this guy could barely walk by the end of his life. But the sheer quantity wasn't even the weirdest part. It was what he ate and how he ate it. A typical meal for Henry included an entire roasted pig, multiple whole chickens, several types of fish, mountains of bread, and enough wine to float a small boat. His kitchen staff prepared over 800 different dishes every single day, just for his household, with Henry personally sampling dozens of them. The royal kitchens employed over 200 people working around the clock to keep up with his appetite. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. Henry was convinced that certain foods had magical properties. He believed eating swan would make him more graceful, consuming large amounts of deer would make him a better hunter, and that oysters would enhance his performance with his wives. So he'd gorge himself on these specific foods in massive quantities, like some kind of medieval superfood obsession. The paranoia extended to every bite. Every single piece of food that entered Henry's mouth was first tasted by multiple servants to check for poison. But get this, he was so paranoid that he required his food tasters to wait 30 minutes after eating before he'd touch anything, just to make sure they didn't drop dead from delayed acting poison. Henry's meals were basically theatrical performances. He'd eat in front of hundreds of courtiers, and the whole process could take up to 4 hours. Imagine sitting there, watching this massive, rotting king slowly work his way through enough food to feed a small village, all while pretending this was perfectly normal royal behavior. But food wasn't Henry's only obsession. By his final years, paranoia had transformed his entire kingdom into a surveillance state that would make modern dictators jealous. Henry was so convinced that everyone was plotting against him that he turned royal life into a living nightmare for everyone around him. Let's start with his sleeping arrangements. Henry slept with loaded crossbows next to his bed and kept multiple daggers under his pillow. But that wasn't enough. He also had armed guards stationed inside his bedroom watching him sleep all night. Imagine being so terrified of assassination that you couldn't even close your eyes without witnesses. Henry ordered the construction of secret passages throughout every palace he lived in. Not for romance or convenience, but so he could escape if assassins came for him. He had peepholes installed in walls so he could spy on his own courtiers. and listening devices hidden in meeting rooms to eavesdrop on private conversations.
But here's where it gets truly insane. Henry created an entire network of spies whose job was to spy on his other spies. He had informants watching his informants, creating this twisted web of surveillance where nobody knew who they could trust. Court life became a psychological horror show where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could literally get you executed. The man even suspected his own children of plotting against him. He had spies watching Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth, his own daughters, because he was convinced they were planning to overthrow him. These were children, and he treated them like enemy agents in their own home. Henry's paranoia got so extreme that he started executing people for crimes they hadn't even committed yet. He'd have someone killed because he dreamed they betrayed him, or because someone else suggested they might be disloyal in the future. The Tower of London was constantly full of people whose only crime was existing near Henry while he was in one of his paranoid moods. But perhaps the most fitting end to this reign of terror was Henry's death itself. You'd think a king's reign of terror would end with his death, right? Wrong. This man was so committed to being a disaster that even his corpse managed to cause absolute mayhem. In his final weeks, Henry was so massive that he couldn't walk, so his servants had to carry him everywhere, using a specially designed chair with pulleys and wheels. But here's the disgusting part. His leg wounds had become so infected that pieces of rotting flesh would literally fall off his body as they moved him. Servants had to follow behind him with cloths to clean up the chunks of decomposing king that dropped on the palace floors. His death scene was like something out of a horror movie. Henry's body had swollen to such grotesque proportions that his skin was stretched tight and shiny. The smell was so overwhelming that even his doctors, who were used to medieval medical horrors, had to leave the room to vomit. But ways get so much worse. Henry's body was so bloated with gases from internal decomposition that his coffin had to be specially reinforced. They wrapped his corpse in lead sheets and sealed it in multiple wooden boxes, thinking that would contain the mess. They were very, very wrong. During the funeral procession from London to Windsor Castle, something absolutely incredible happened. The coffin literally exploded. The gases from Henry's decomposing body built up so much pressure that the lead lining burst open and rotting royal remains splattered all over the inside of the hearse. The smell was so horrific that the funeral procession had to stop while servants cleaned up the mess with buckets and rags. Here's a detail that will haunt your dreams. Dogs were reportedly seen licking up the remains of Henry VIII that had leaked from his coffin onto the road. The man who claimed to rule by divine right ended up as dog food on a country highway. Even his burial became a disaster. They had to dig his grave extra wide to accommodate the massive coffin, but the ground kept collapsing because the soil couldn't support the weight of all that lead and rotting flesh. It took multiple attempts just to get the king's remains into the ground and keep them there. So there you have it, the real Henry VIII. Not the charismatic king of popular culture, but a walking disaster whose own body betrayed him as dramatically as he betrayed everyone around him. A man so consumed by paranoia and gluttony that he turned one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms into his personal horror show. The most powerful man in England became a prisoner of his own decaying body. And even death couldn't end his capacity for causing absolute chaos. His legacy isn't just the Church of England or his 6 wives. It's a masterclass in how absolute power can turn a human being into something genuinely monstrous. From Renaissance prince to rotting tyrant, Henry VIII's transformation remains one of history's most disturbing examples of power's corruption. The king who claimed divine authority couldn't even control his own flesh, and in the end, his body's rebellion became the perfect metaphor for his reign. Explosive, disgusting, and utterly unforgettable. If these disturbing royal revelations made you question everything you thought you knew about the Tudors, there are plenty more horrifying historical truths waiting to be uncovered.
The textbooks only tell you what they think you can handle. But you've proven you can handle the real story.
Subscribe for more AI Time Travelers interviews